Welcome to Mother's Dairy. Let's hear a story today from Texas. My own son looked the judge dead in the eye and screamed that I was psychotic. He said I was dangerous. He said I belonged in a mental institution, not in charge of my own bank accounts. My name is Cheryl. I am 58 years old. And as I sat in the Dallas County Courthouse listening to my own flesh and blood destroy my character, I did not shed a tear. I did not yell back. I just sat there wearing my navy blue blazer, resting my hands on a stack of documents that my son didn't even know existed. My son stood up, face red with rage, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "She is mentally unstable. She is paranoid. If you don't grant me emergency guardianship right now, she will burn every cent of the estate in one of her episodes. She doesn't even know what year it is." The courtroom went silent. I simply adjusted my glasses and looked at the judge. The judge, a woman who has seen every lie in the book, slowly lowered her reading glasses. She didn't look at my son. She looked straight at his young, arrogant attorney who was smirking, thinking he had already won. Then she asked the one question that changed the entire atmosphere of the room. She leaned forward and said with a voice cold as ice, "Counselor, do you truly have no idea who this woman is? The woman you are just calling incompetent?" The lawyer's smirk vanished. He froze. He looked at his notes, then at me, then back at the judge, panic rising in his eyes. My son's face went from angry to pale in a split second. He stammered, "Wait, what?" Before we see if my son gets the money or a prison sentence, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by your own family? It helps me share the truth. Now let me tell you how this trap was set. To understand exactly why my son was desperate enough to perjure himself in a court of law, we have to go back to a windy Tuesday at the Dallas City Cemetery. It was the day we buried my sister Margaret. I was standing by the grave holding a single white rose when a sleek black Mercedes pulled up onto the grass. The door opened and out stepped Dustin Vance, my 32-year-old son, whom I hadn't seen in 4 years. He was wearing a tailored Italian suit that looked expensive, but as a forensic auditor, I noticed details others miss. I saw the small barcode sticker on the rear passenger window of the car. It was a rental. Next to him was Heidi, his wife, a woman who always looked at me as if I were a walking ATM. She was dabbing her dry eyes with a handkerchief, performing grief for an audience of one. Dustin walked up to me not to hug me, but to stand beside me. He didn't look at his aunt's casket. He looked at his watch. "It's a shame, Mom," he said, his voice devoid of any real emotion. "Did Aunt Margaret have her affairs in order? I know she had that trust fund. Who handles that now? Do you have access?" I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "We are here to say goodbye, Dustin, not to audit her accounts." He didn't like that answer. Over the next few hours, his behavior shifted from indifferent to strange. He began hovering around me, watching my every move with a predatory intensity. This was when the psychological manipulation, what they call gaslighting, began. At the wake, I set my car keys on the kitchen counter. 10 minutes later, they were gone. I spent 20 minutes looking for them, only for Dustin to hold them up from the living room table. "Mom," he said loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "They are right here. You put them here. Are you forgetting things again? You seem confused." I knew I hadn't put them there, but I said nothing. Later, while I was making tea, he leaned in close. "Did you hear that whispering, Mom, in the hallway?" "No." "That's worrying. You really should get checked out." He was planting seeds. He was trying to create a narrative of decline. I assumed he was just being cruel, trying to make me feel insecure because of his own long absence. I underestimated him. He wasn't just being cruel, he was building a case file. 3 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Dustin, it was a process server. He handed me a thick envelope and apologized. I opened the document in my kitchen. It was a petition filed in the Dallas County Family Court. Dustin Vance was filing for permanent emergency guardianship of the estate. I read the allegations and my hands actually shook, not from fear, but from rage. Paragraph 3 stated, "The proposed ward, Cheryl Vance, is suffering from acute psychotic disorder with paranoid tendencies. She is no longer capable of managing her finances and poses a risk of dissipating her assets." He wasn't just trying to help me pay bills. He was asking the court to declare me legally incompetent so he could take sole control of the $2.5 million inheritance Margaret had left me. He didn't want a mother, he wanted a bank account that couldn't say no. The next morning found me sitting in a leather armchair in the corner office of Marcus Thorne, a 60-year-old attorney who has been my legal counsel and confidant for 3 decades. The view outside overlooked the Dallas skyline, but my attention was fixed on the stack of papers resting on his mahogany desk. "It is worse than we thought, Cheryl," Marcus said, his voice grave as he slid the documents toward me. "He isn't just asking for control. He is building a narrative for institutionalization." I picked up the file, my fingers brushing against the cold paper. This was the evidence Dustin had submitted to the court. According to a signed affidavit, I was frequently found screaming at invisible people in my backyard at 3 in the morning. Another page listed a series of irrational financial behaviors, claiming I had purchased expensive, useless equipment that I didn't know how to use. He painted a picture of a woman who was a danger to herself, a woman who needed to be locked away in a secure facility for her own safety. The cruelty of it made my stomach turn. If he succeeded, he wouldn't just take the inheritance. He would put me in a home and sell my house, the house my late husband and I had built to liquidate the assets. "He wants to erase me, Marcus," I said softly, the realization settling in like a heavy stone. "He needs me out of the way so he can strip the estate bare." Marcus leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "We can fight this with character witnesses, but these medical claims, even if false, they stick. We need a strategy." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I am not a victim. I am a forensic auditor. I have spent 30 years tracking illicit funds for the government. I opened my proprietary software, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my glasses. "He claims I am the one hemorrhaging money," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let's see where his funds are actually going." "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, watching me with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Dustin uses my address for his mail to avoid state taxes in his current district." I explained, accessing the credit header databases that I used for work. "That gives me legal access to verify the residency and financial stability of the household." I began to dig. It didn't take long to peel back the layers of my son's successful life. The luxury cars were all leases and 2 were currently in default. His supposed real estate investments were non-existent, but the smoking gun appeared when I cross-referenced his bank transfers with known high-risk speculative platforms. There it was in bright red numbers. Over the last 6 months, Dustin had transferred a total of $450,000 to an unregulated cryptocurrency exchange that had collapsed just weeks ago. He hadn't just lost his own money, he had leveraged himself to the hilt. I drilled deeper into his recent liabilities. There were 3 massive transfers from a private lending firm in Nevada, a company known in my industry as a front for predatory lending. High-interest, violent collection methods. "Look at this date, Marcus," I said, pointing to the screen. The repayment schedule for the private loan had a hard deadline. A balloon payment was due on March 15th. That was exactly 2 days after the scheduled court hearing. "He doesn't think I'm crazy," I whispered, the final piece of the puzzle locking into place. "He is terrified. He owes nearly $500,000 to dangerous people, and my inheritance is the only way he stays alive." Why? With the financial motive locked away in my encrypted hard drive, I shifted my focus to the weapon Dustin was using against me, the medical diagnosis. I took the original affidavit he had filed with the court and stared at the signature at the bottom, Dr. Aris, Psychiatry and Neurology. I didn't recognize the name, which was unusual. I have audited medical insurance fraud for 10 years in this state. I know the reputable doctors. I got into my car and punched the address listed on the letterhead into my GPS. The navigation took me 40 minutes south away from the medical district and into a neighborhood filled with payday loan shops and boarded-up storefronts. The destination was not a clinic. It was a dilapidated strip mall. The unit listed on the document was empty, the windows covered in brown paper with a faded "For Lease" sign hanging crookedly on the door. I took photographs of the building, the empty unit, and the timestamp on my phone. This was not a place where medical evaluations happened. This was a ghost address. Back in my car, I made a call to an old colleague at the state medical board. "I need you to pull a file on a Dr. Elias Aris." I said, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause followed by the sound of typing. Then a sharp intake of breath. Cheryl, why are you asking about him? He isn't practicing. We revoked his license permanently 3 years ago. He was running a pill mill selling prescriptions for controlled substances to anyone with cash. He is currently awaiting trial. Thank you, I said, ending the call. The document Dustin had submitted to the court wasn't just inaccurate. It was a forgery created with the help of a disgraced former doctor. It was a federal felony, but I still had one loose end to tie up. In his petition, Dustin claimed he had video evidence of me looking lethargic, slurring my words, and staring blankly at walls during his visits. I knew I wasn't crazy, but I also knew I had felt unusually tired whenever he came over for dinner. I drove home, my heart pounding with a sickening suspicion. Dustin knew about the alarm system on the front door, but he didn't know about the high-definition internal cameras I had installed in the kitchen and living room after a break-in scare 2 years ago. They were hidden in the smoke detectors. I sat at my kitchen island and pulled up the cloud footage from February 12th, the date of his last visit. I watched myself on the screen preparing dinner. Then the camera captured Dustin walking into the frame while my back was turned. He looked over his shoulder, checking the hallway. Then, with practiced speed, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small vial, and crushed a white powder into my cup of Earl Grey tea. He stirred it with his finger and slid the cup back to my placemat. 20 minutes later in the footage, I was slumping in my chair, eyes unfocused, barely able to lift my head. That was when Dustin pulled out his phone and started recording me asking questions I couldn't answer. He hadn't just lied about my mental health. My own son had drugged me to manufacture proof of my incompetence. That night, sleep was impossible. At 11:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message that simply read, "Mom, please meet me. The diner on Oak Street. Don't tell him." I drove through the rain to the 24-hour diner on the edge of town. Sitting in a booth at the back, huddled over a cold cup of coffee, was Audrey, my 25-year-old daughter. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red, her fingernails bitten down to the quick. When I slid into the booth opposite her, she didn't look up. She just slid her phone across the laminate table toward me. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to sign it, I swear." I looked at the screen. It was a text conversation with Dustin from 3 days ago. "Dustin, I need you to sign the affidavit regarding Mom's violent outbursts. The lawyer is emailing it now." Audrey, "But she doesn't have outbursts. That's a lie, Dustin. I can't do that." Dustin, "Then you better figure out how to pay for your final year of grad school yourself and start packing. If I don't get guardianship, the trust freezes and I'm evicting you from the condo. Sign the paper or you're on the street." I read the messages twice, a cold fury settling in my chest. Dustin wasn't just targeting me, he was holding his own sister hostage financially. The affidavit Audrey had signed claiming I smashed plates and screamed at walls wasn't a betrayal. It was a ransom payment. I reached across the table and took Audrey's shaking hands in mine. I didn't see a traitor. I saw a young woman who had been bullied by a desperate man. "You don't have to apologize," I said firmly, making her look at me. "He used your fear against you. That is what predators do." "He said he's the executor," Audrey cried softly. "He said he controls everything now." "He controls nothing," I corrected her. "He is drowning and he is trying to use us as life rafts, but tomorrow that stops." "What do I do?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "If I retract my statement, he'll ruin me." "You don't need to fight him, Audrey," I said calmly. "Tomorrow you just need to sit in that courtroom. When the time comes, if the judge asks you a question, you answer it. Not with what Dustin told you to say, but with the truth. Can you do that?" She took a deep breath, looked at the text messages one last time and nodded. "Yes." I drove home with a sense of finality. The investigation was over. It was time to assemble the weapon. I sat at my dining room table and opened my black leather briefcase. I began to organize the death file, the stack of evidence that would end my son's charade. I organized the documents with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. At the very bottom, I placed the financial records of his gambling debts. On top of that, I placed the USB drive containing the video footage of him drugging my tea. On top of that, I placed the screenshots of his threats to Audrey. And at the very top, the first thing the judge would see, I placed the printed certification from the state medical board, stamped in red ink, license revoked permanent. Everything was ready. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for him to walk into it. The air in courtroom 402 was stale and thick with tension. We were 30 minutes into the hearing, and Dustin's attorney, a young man named Brandon with more hair gel than legal experience, was pacing back and forth, painting a portrait of me that was unrecognizable. "Your Honor," Brandon stated, gesturing theatrically toward me. "We are dealing with a tragedy. Mrs. Vance is a danger to herself. She speaks to people who aren't there. She spends thousands of dollars on equipment she doesn't understand. My client, her devoted son, is only asking for the power to protect what is left of his family's legacy before she destroys it all." Then it was Dustin's turn. He took the stand, wiping away fake tears with a practiced hand. He looked at the judge, his voice cracking with emotion. "It breaks my heart, Your Honor. I've tried to care for her. I've tried to manage her medications, but she's paranoid. She thinks I'm trying to hurt her. I just want my mother to be safe." For a moment, I saw sympathy in the eyes of the court clerk. He was good. He was very good. But then Marcus, my attorney, stood up for the cross-examination. He didn't ask about my health. He didn't ask about the money. He simply asked, "Mr. Vance, are you aware of the penalties for perjury in the state of Texas?" Dustin's mask slipped. The aggression I had seen at the funeral surfaced instantly. He gripped the railing of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. "I am not lying. She is the one who is sick." "Is she?" Marcus asked calmly. "Or is she just inconvenient?" That was the spark. Dustin snapped. He stood up, face red, and screamed the words that would seal his fate. "She is mentally unstable. She is paranoid. If you don't grant me guardianship, she will burn every cent of the estate in one of her episodes." The echo of his voice hung in the room. I sat perfectly still. Judge Patricia Caldwell lowered her reading glasses. She looked at the young lawyer, then at Dustin, and asked the question that shattered their reality. "Counselor, do you truly have no idea who this woman is? The woman you are calling incompetent?" Dustin blinked, confused. She's a retired housewife. She's my mother." "No, Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice ringing with authority. "She is not just your mother. I have reviewed the sealed employment records submitted by the defense this morning. Mrs. Vance is a senior forensic consultant for the Federal Financial Crimes Investigation Bureau. She has been the lead auditor on 3 of the largest corporate fraud cases in this district in the last 5 years. The Department of Justice trusts this woman to find hidden assets in billion-dollar schemes. I find it highly unlikely that she has suddenly forgotten how to balance a checkbook." Dustin's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyer, who was frantically shuffling papers, realizing he had done 0 background checks on the opposing party. "And now," the judge continued, nodding to Marcus, "I believe the defense has evidence to present regarding the petitioner's credibility." Marcus walked to the bench and handed over the death file. He didn't say a word. He just placed the documents down one by one. "Exhibit A," Marcus said, "a certification from the state medical board confirming that Dr. Elias Aris, the man who signed the medical affidavit for Dustin, had his medical license permanently revoked 3 years ago for felonious distribution of controlled substances." The judge's eyes narrowed. She looked at Dustin with pure disdain. "Exhibit B." Marcus continued, placing a laptop on the clerk's desk and turning the screen toward the bench. "Security footage from the respondent's kitchen on February 12th. The video played in silence. The entire courtroom watched as Dustin looked over his shoulder, pulled the vial from his pocket, and crushed the white powder into my tea. A collective gasp swept through the room. Heidi, sitting in the back row, put her hand over her mouth. Dustin sank into his chair, his face draining of all color. "And finally," Marcus said, playing the last card, "we have a witness." Audrey stood up from the back of the room. She was shaking, but her head was high. Dustin's eyes went wide. He started to mouth something to her, a threat perhaps, but the bailiff took a step toward him and he froze. Audrey walked to the front. She didn't look at her brother. She looked at the judge. "Miss Vance," the judge asked gently, "did you sign an affidavit stating your mother was violent?" "I did," Audrey said, her voice trembling but clear. "But it was a lie. Why did you sign it?" Because my brother told me he controlled the estate. Audrey said, tears spilling down her cheeks. He told me he would cut off my tuition and evict me from my home if I didn't help him prove Mom was crazy. He said he needed the money to pay off. Bad people. Marcus placed the final document on the judge's desk, the foreclosure notice on Dustin's leased car, and the repayment schedule for the $450,000 debt to the predatory lenders in Nevada. The puzzle was complete. The crazy mother was a federal investigator. The dutiful son was a desperate addict. The medical proof was a felony. Dustin put his head in his hands. His lawyer began quietly packing his briefcase, trying to distance himself from the disaster unfolding next to him. Judge Patricia Caldwell didn't even call for a recess. She stared at Dustin with a look that promised consequences far worse than a lost inheritance. Judge Caldwell did not bang her gavel. She didn't need to. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush bone. She looked at Dustin, then at the federal agents who had quietly entered the back of the courtroom during the testimony. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied with prejudice. She stated, her voice cutting through the air. Furthermore, given the overwhelming evidence of forged federal medical documents and attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, I am remanding both Mr. Vance and Mrs. Vance into custody immediately. Before Dustin could even stand up, the bailiff was behind him. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest noise in the room. Heidi began to sob, screaming that she didn't know anything, that she was just doing what her husband told her to do. Dustin didn't say a word. He just looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief.